let's start with a quick question. If a movement is really grassroots, why does it roll out like a Fortune 500 marketing campaign, take over every university, get its own UN agency, and hover up billions in funding? Either the ladies in those 1970s living rooms were secretly the greatest fundraisers in human history, or somebody with a much bigger checkbook was very interested in where this could go. Today we are following the money trail behind modern feminism. Who paid for it, why they did that, and why men's issues somehow never got invited to the whole funding party. Who really funded feminism? The myth versus the money. We all know the official story. Feminism was just regular women bravely sharing their feelings over coffee, then marching in the streets, and magically, this whole thing turned into university departments, UN agencies, an army of NGOs, and enough grant money to drown a small country. With that being said, I am trying to build my YouTube channel completely organically, and not at all on the algorithm playing God by funding it with hundreds of thousands, which I have been offered that. I am not denying that there were real grassroots activists, there were, but the jump from photocopying zins to we control academia, law, media, and global development language doesn't happen with money raised from baking sales. Someone bankrolled this. So in this video, I am going to talk about who wrote the big checks, how they steered which kind of feminism, what they got out of it, and why men and boys got the budget line labeled LOL. No. Let's start with the Ford Foundation, basically feminism's sugar daddy in the 1970s. While the media was showing angry protesters burning bras, Ford at the same time was quietly backing up a money track to the academy. We are talking tens of millions in that decade alone, which in today's money is a lot of patriarchy smashing. A program officer named Mariam Chamberlain became one of the main architects here. She helped direct millions too, seed women's studies programs, fund feminist research, and bankroll legal and policy work around gender equality. Universities at the time weren't exactly begging to create whole departments dedicated to brand new ideology. Then Ford walks in like, don't worry, we'll pay for it. Just say the magic word, gender. And surprise, women's studies departments start springing up like mushrooms after rain. Except instead of mushrooms, it's tenured ideologies who will later tell you your kids that masculinity is a disease. Here is what didn't spring up. Men's studies departments with equal funding, serious research centers on male suicide, fatherlessness, boys failing in school. Apparently, equality meant we will build an entire institution for one side and pretend the other side doesn't exist. Totally organic, if you ask me. Totally grassroots, nothing to see here. Next up, Rockefeller and Carnage, the OG, we would like to manage society, thanks, kind of foundations. Rockefeller cut grants to groups like Now in the early 70s, not huge amounts, but enough to say, you are not fringe anymore, you are respectable, and you belong to us, you are ours. Meanwhile, these guys had been obsessed with population control and family planning since the mid-20th century. So question now, if you've spent decades funding birth control campaigns, sterilization programs, and let's lower the birth rate among the poor, are you going to be A, super uninterested in feminism's push in abortion and contraception, or B, jumping out of your chair yelling, finally, a marketing department that fits our agenda? Carnage, for its part, starts boosting women in academia and professional life. What does that translate to? More female professionals, more credentialed voices to carry feminism, taking points into the system. Still, zero parallel effort for men and boys. It's almost like the goal was never balanced. It was like, tilt the board in one very specific direction. Then right after that, Uncle Sam looks over and goes, wow, that's a nice social engineering project you've got there. Mind if I join? What did that get you? Federal funding for the 1977 National Women's Conference, laws like Title IX and the Women's Educational Equality Act, and crucially, money attached to them. Bureaucracies and enforcement offices staffed by people trained in the very feminist departments Ford and his friends just paid for. Then come the big Violence Against Women Act and funding streams. Then right after that come the big Violence Against Women Acts and funding streams. Grants for shelters, hotlines, training, and awareness. A narrative baked into law. Women equal victims, men equal perpetrators. Now, is the violence against women real? Obviously. Nobody who is sane denies that. But notice what never gets built. A Violence Against Men's Act. Equivalent campaigns and services branded for male victims. Men are more likely to be victims of homicide, war, street crime, and a lot of domestic abuse is mutually or female initiated. But the money, the branding, and the moral halo all go one way, because otherwise it just doesn't fit the agenda. The state didn't just step in to help, it stepped in to officially encode the feminist framing. Enter the Miss Foundation for Women, co-founded by Gloria Steinem, also known as the Feminist Money Launderettes. Here is the absolutely genius business model that she came up with. Big donors and foundations, we want to support women's causes, but we don't know the small groups and we don't want to look bad. Miss Foundation goes, send it all to us. We will wash it, spin it, and hand it out to the right activists. I promise. The result of that conversation was a steady flow of cash from elites at the top, which was redistributed to grassroots groups that say the right things at the bottom. Grants are small enough to look local and authentic, $5,000 here, $25,000 there, but big enough to keep the organizations alive, on message, and dependent. You get the appearance of thousands of flowers sort of blooming, all carefully watered from the same irrigation system. And when you control the irrigation, you decide which flowers thrive and which ones conveniently don't align with our funding priorities this year. Here we move on to the UN, when feminism goes global bureaucrat. At some point, it stops being a movement and becomes the operating system of a global governance. The UN launches big women's conferences, then creates specialized funds and agencies just for women's issues. Eventually, you get UN Women, a full-blown bureaucracy that exists solely to promote one side of the gender story worldwide. Good job. They hand out grants, shape development policy, and pressure governments to adopt feminist-approved laws. If you want UN approval, Western aid, and good PR, you better tick the gender mainstream boxes. Have you ever heard of UN Men? No? Pretty weird, right? Because if this was just about gender equality, you would think someone somewhere would say, hey, maybe we should have an agency for boys dropping out of school, male suicide, fatherlessness, and men dying in crappy jobs that women just want. Very simply take on. But that conversation never makes it into the official documents, into the news, into the big government agenda. Apparently, my conclusion from this is that male suffering is sustainable. It's absolutely fine. MacArthur and open society. This is when the big private players join in the whole party. MacArthur Foundation and Open Society Foundations roll out globally like McDonald's, but for NGOs. Would you like some reproductive rights with that structural adjustments? Can we interest you in a side of a gender justice? This is how I imagine that conversation went. They connect the money from Western allies to local feminist groups in Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Asia, globally, everywhere. What did they have on the menu, you may ask? Push feminist legal reforms, finance gender training, attach strings to aid so governments adopt this framework. Now, what wasn't on the menu was definitely not father rights, rebuilding intact families, helping boys who are falling apart in school, defending any traditional role that doesn't fit in the new script. That wasn't on the menu. If your cause helps turn traditional society into something more atomized, more dependent on state and NGO structures, and more culturally aligned with Western progressive tastes, congratulations, step right up. There is a grant for that. If your cause is keeping boys from killing themselves, good luck with funding the money from the baking sale. Melinda Gates drops $1 billion. By 2019, this thing is so normalized that Melinda Gates can announce a $1 billion pledge for gender equality in the US, and everybody just nods like, yes, of course, more of that, very moral. That didn't age very well considering recent stories about her husband. Never mind. No one asks, didn't you guys already win every institution? Why does this need $1 billion more? Are men doing great or something? Did I miss the memo? That money targets women in leadership, feminist advocacy, workplace equality by design. I can guarantee you there isn't any billionaire out there who is saying, do you know what is keeping me up at night? Male suicide, boys for failing reading, fatherlessness homes. Here is $1 billion to fix that. Apparently, the only acceptable way to talk about gender and money at that level is give more to women. Anything else gets you labeled a monster or a misogynist, of course, as we know, as I have been labeled so far. Now, the boring, darkly funny part. Let's talk motives, because no one cuts checks like this just because they liked a slogan on a protest sign. Population control, okay? Big foundations were already neck deep in population control. Feminism's reproductive freedom angle was basically a rebrand of the same goal. Fewer babies, especially among the poor in the developing world. Elites said, we would like lower birth rates. Feminism said, my body, my choice. Elites said, perfect, send them the money. More workers, more taxes. My absolute favorite. Everyone knows about it, but they still can't quite accept it. Getting women into full-time careers does a few handy-dandy things. Doubles the labor pool, which keeps wages in check, which in turn doubles the number of taxpayers. It makes families more dependent on daycare, schools, and services, all great for expanding institutions and pushing the agenda that they wish to push at any given time. But sure, this was all purely about smashing stereotypes, not about building a nice, big, compliant workforce. Cold War PR. During the Cold War, the USSR bragged, we have women in the workforce. The US went, oh yeah? Well, we'll do that too. But with lipstick and advertising agencies, we'll just make it that much better. Feminism became a way to market Western capitalism as kinder and more progressive. You can almost hear the think tank memo. Communists, women in factories, capitalists, women in boardrooms. We win, sent to the media. Controlling the message. By funding universities, NGOs, and advocacy groups, elites didn't just support feminism, they edited it. The original idea. The original feminists are honestly just swearing in their graves right now. They nudged it away from critiquing capitalism, valuing full-time motherhood, and building solidarity with working class men, which was the original idea, which I fully stand for. And they switched it more towards identity politics, professional class careerism, endless talk about representation in elite spaces. Men went from potential allies in rethinking work and family structure to the problem. Men are the problem. That framing is very convenient if you happen to run the systems that actually caused most of the misery. While all this was happening for women, why don't we check the scoreboard for men at the same time? Skyrocketing male suicide? No major global program. Boys falling behind in school and grades? A few reports, no billion-dollar pledges from Bill Gates. Fatherlessness and broken families, mostly ignored or blamed on toxic masculinity. Male homelessness, prison populations, or overdose deaths? Background noise, not important. If a dog shelter got treated the way society treats men and boys, there would be riots, okay? Feminism gets custom-built funding pipelines, UN agencies, university departments, and billion-dollar pledges. Men get told, man up, you're the problem. Also, please pay the taxes that can fund the hatred of you, actually, if you don't mind, whilst we're at it. So, how was this all really engineered? Let's now put all of this together. Was there a real grassroots feminist movement? Yes, there was. Of course there was. But at the same time, you've got to ask yourself a question. Did elites see something extremely useful in it and pour in money to shape and supercharge the whole thing? Also, absolutely yes. What we ended up with at the moment is not just a movement, not just an ideology, but an entire infrastructure, academic, legal, bureaucratic, and global. And on the other side, no equivalent infrastructure for men. Few organizations here and there, men are killing themselves. Okay, that's not enough. No major concern for collateral damage of all of this. Just a shrug and maybe a TED talk about rethinking masculinity in a modern world. Call it whatever you want. Social engineering, managed revolution, elite-approved feminism. But purely organic uprising from below, it is a fairy tale that probably should retire at this point. I think it's the time for us to move on to the final rant into the camera on this video. And here is the question I would like to leave you with. If the people who funded feminism for 50 years really cared about gender justice, why did they build an empire for one sex and a vacuum for the other? Honestly, why is there $1 billion to get more women into Fortune 500 leadership, but basically nothing to keep teenage boys from killing themselves in their bedrooms, being called incels? Maybe that's not really an accident if you think about it. Maybe the system isn't broken at all, actually. Maybe it all worked out to someone's plan. Maybe this is exactly how it was designed to work. If that pisses you off even a little, it might be worth just hitting a like, drop a comment, maybe a subscribe button. And I would really appreciate it if you share it with someone who still thinks feminism was just a bunch of women with handmade signs and zero backing. And if you're a man or a boy watching this, just remember, they were never going to build anything for you, sadly. So if something is going to exist for men, we are going to have to build it ourselves. Peace out.